Hey everyone, welcome to the Zeitgeist on A Mighty Blaze. I am your host, Jane Roper, although I'm not going to be your host today because we have the fabulous Nancy Johnson guest hosting, talking with Jason Mott about his newest novel, Hell of a Book. Welcome, Jason, and welcome, Nancy. Glad to have you here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it, Jane.
Sure thing. I'm so excited to listen to your conversation. One exciting announcement for our audience. We are going to do a giveaway today. So if you're watching live and you leave a comment or a question, you will be automatically entered in a drawing to win a copy of Hell of a Book. So watch, leave your comment or question. We will be taking questions toward the end anyway. And we're going to announce toward the end who wins. And you just get in touch with the Mighty Blaze and give us your info, and we'll get that out to you. So we'll provide more details as we go. But I just want to briefly give a intro for Nancy. Nancy Johnson's debut novel, The Kindest Lie, which is there on the shelf behind her, was published in February. It was named one of the most anticipated books of 2021 by the Oprah Magazine, Shondaland, NBC News, Marie Claire, Elle, the Chicago Tribune, the New York Post, Good Housekeeping, Parade, Refinery 29, and more. The New York Times Book Review said Johnson's rich examinations of ambiguities in a moral dilemma take center stage, but institutional racism and its constant draining impact are the boards these players stand on and can't escape. The Kindest Lie is an easy, accessible novel filled with hard, important truths. A native of Chicago's South Side, Nancy worked for more than a decade as an Emmy-nominated, award-winning television journalist. Today, she manages brand communications for a large healthcare nonprofit and manages to squeeze in time to write as well. And her next novel will be out in 2023. And remind me what it's called. You just told me.
Yeah, that's all right. People of Means.
People of Means. All right, well, we'll look forward to that. So I'll turn it over to you, Nancy and Jason. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Jane. That was an incredible introduction. I just wrote a book, but, Jason, you wrote a hell of a book. It really is a hell of a book, I know we were talking a little bit backstage, but I said I'll just wait till we went live to kind of fangirl over how impressive this particular book is. I mean, it really is an incredible one. I'm hoping that people will leave comments and questions as we talk, because I know we want to hear from all of you who are viewing. And I'm going to give you just a short bio on Jason so that we can get right into the conversation. I've got so many questions to ask about this book. Jason Mott is the author of Hell of a Book, which just released this week. It was named a Read with Jenna Today Show pick, and that is huge, people, those who don't know. Jason has published 3 previous novels. His first novel, The Returned, was a New York Times bestseller and was turned into a TV series that ran for 2 seasons. And what's it called? The series, Jason, Resurrection?
Yes, called Resurrection. It was on ABC, and I think it's actually streaming now on Amazon Prime.
Okay, yeah, because I'm going to be checking that out this weekend for sure. Jason has a BFA in fiction and an MFA in poetry, both from the University of North Carolina at Wilmington. His poetry and fiction have appeared in various literary journals. So welcome, Jason.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Good. I'm so excited to have you. So my first question for you is a loaded one, and we both know these. The first question is the one.
I appreciate the warning. Okay.
I know. Yeah. It's the one that everybody gets asked in the beginning. So it's the easy, softball question, but it's loaded because your book centers on this author who is on book tour, and he's going through this hilarious media training with this guy named Jack, and they talk about the right and the wrong way to answer the question, what is your book about? So, I'm going to start with that one. What is your book about?
Okay, fair enough. No, that's a good question. So on its surface level, the book is about this author who goes on, he's just written a really big book, and he goes on a book tour to promote the book. And as he's out on the book tour, readers quickly discover that this author has a problem with separating reality from fiction, or from imagination, rather. But as he's out on the book tour, he meets this 10-year-old kid who's simply known as the Kid. And there's some connection between him and the kid. He doesn't know what it is. This kid keeps showing up at every event that he goes to as he's traveling around the country. So that's kind of the main narrative. Then there's also a secondary narrative about this 10-year-old boy named Soot who lives in a small town in the South, and just kind of following his journey, and all of these threads kind of tie together to have this discussion about race and America, and all those things that kind of follow with.
Yeah, it's brilliant how you're able to kind of braid all those narratives into one, and they all connect just so brilliantly. And I'm thinking about the title of the book, hell of a book. So like, I feel like, you know, as a fellow author, like you had to be feeling yourself a little bit to call it a book.
No, I want to defend myself on that.
Okay.
I want to defend myself. So weirdly enough, I have never actually titled any of my novels.
Really?
It always comes to either my agent or my editor, because I'm really terrible at titles. Like, I admit it, I'm really terrible at it. So with this book, when I was writing the manuscript, the author everyone that met the author said, "Oh my God, you wrote such a hell of a book, hell of a book, hell of a book." And so at some point, my agent and I were talking about what we should title the book, because I had no title for it. And she said, "You know, we have to call it hell of a book." And I said, "No, there's no way we're calling this. That's such an arrogant, bizarre title. There's no way we're calling it that." And then, you know, I kept trying to come up with something better, and I couldn't. And finally, she said, "We're just going to go ahead and do it." And we did, and things worked out.
And it worked out because the book lived up to the name. You know what I mean?
Right.
I was thinking at first, oh, he has to be so supremely confident to be
No,
able
I am completely unconfident at all times. I am completely insecure at all times in life.
And that kind of comes through with the author in the book too. So right. I think a bit. Yeah. And so you mentioned when you talked about what it's about, that character Soot, and he's this boy, and he's very dark skinned, the color of soot, right?
Yes.
And he plays this imaginary game with his parents about being invisible and being unseen. And so it resonated for me a lot as just growing up as a kid who was bullied a lot, really always in those moments of being picked on so relentlessly, wanting people really not to see me, and wanting, pretending and wanting so badly to be invisible.
Yes.
And also it made me think about being Black in America too. And as a Black person, I want to be seen.
Right.
But yet when I'm seen, sometimes being seen can be dangerous, both physically and psychologically and all these other ways. And can you just talk about that idea of being seen versus being unseen, invisible, and kind of, is that a survival mechanism? What is that about?
Yeah, so I'll try to talk around it as gently as I can. I don't want to spoil things for readers who haven't read the book yet. But there's a lot of discussion in the book about identity and about self-identity and how we're seen by society as a whole. And I think you nailed it on the head right there when you were saying how, like, as a Black person in America, you are both very seen and very unseen in very different ways. You're seen in the context of, I mean, let's just face it, like, you know, you're on police have your, you know, you're on their radar at all times. But even beyond that, like, if you're in a room and you're usually a minority, like, you're always the standout person there. So you're always, in this sense, very seen. And yet at the same time, you're rarely seen for who you actually are. You're seen for who the perception and, you know, the images of you can kind of exist as, but you're very rarely seen for who you are. So that duality of being seen and yet also being invisible, and the dissonance between the two, is what the characters in the book are actually kind of dealing with a lot. The author, for example, who the story's around, he is very visible. Like, he's just written the biggest book of his life. So he's being very visible. And then you've got this kid who shows up and can suddenly disappear and comes back and fade out. So the two try to have this dialogue about what that means to be an American, to be a minority in America, and like that duality of being seen and being invisible at the same time. Yeah,
that's so interesting. I don't think I had thought about how seen an author on book tour is and juxtapose that in a way. Yeah. So that's an interesting way to think about that. And you mentioned police violence, and and so there's this recurring encounter. So I'm trying not to give away too much, but this recurring encounter that the author has with people who know something bad has happened to a boy. And then there's the author is trying to express sympathy, but struggles with the sympathy or the empathy, and how that comes across. And I'm just wondering, were you trying to connect that with the way people react to the recurring police violence against Black people?
Yes, wholeheartedly. Because particularly in the last few years, like, there was this period of time when I was actually, before I started writing the book, and this is kind of what inspired me to write the book, there was this period of time where it was literally every day there was a shooting, it seemed. And I had a friend in Baltimore. He and I were having these phone calls in the mornings, just kind of trying to decompress and talk about it all. And it was so frequent and so often that it was like, well, did you hear about this one? It's like, oh man, I hadn't even heard about that one yet. But there was this kind of numbing that began to kind of happen where there's just so many of them that you start to kind of go numb, and you want to, like, I think a part of us wants to believe that someone else will fix this. Someone else will hit the switch, solve the problem, and we can just continue with our lives in our shells and our kind of like, the way we kind of exist. And so that's what the author is very much trying to do. He's trying really desperately to just remain in his shell. He wrote a book. He's trying to enjoy the book. He wants to stay there. But at some point, he needs to activate and break out of that shell, which I think is a message for kind of all of us when it comes to certain issues.
Yeah. Thinking about that police violence, like I didn't have this in my questions, but I was thinking about in the opening of the book, well, not the first scene, but the next one, the one where the author is running through the hotel and he's naked, by the way.
Yeah.
Which is an important detail. He's butt naked, running through the hotel, like being chased by this dude and khakis with like a wife and like 2.3 kids and and like it lives in the white picket fence house and all of that and I just think about that made me think about and you can tell me what that meant. For me, I thought about when I read it initially in that moment in the book, kind of like the boogeyman not being the guy in the white hood necessarily who's driving the pickup truck with the Confederate flag and all these ways that we think that's the boogeyman, but that it's quite often, the nice family guy, white family guy. And tell me what you were doing with that.
Well, there's a little bit of that there for sure. There's some layers of that going on, but like that scene in particular, like there's such an absurdity to be in an author-owned book tour. A lot of the experiences for this novel actually came out of my very first book tour for The Return back in 2013. Because I went from basically answering phones at a call center to being a best-selling author and being on a book tour. And it was such a surreal kind of experience that I wanted to capture the insanity and craziness of. Now, I have not run naked through a hotel at 3 a.m. I will say that. So, just answer that question right now. But the book swings back and forth between this really surrealist, absurdist kind of approach to storytelling, and yet also this very real world layering about violence in America and existence and race and all those kinds of things. So there are definitely some bizarre moments for people to kind of laugh at, but also if you dig into it, there's a lot to be said there as well.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the book is so funny, like you just laugh out loud funny, and yet you're dealing with these really serious issues, like you'll be laughing one moment, you'll be crying the next, and it's like you're just on this roller coaster of emotions when you're reading this book. And is there a reason for that? Do you feel like we need that kind of levity and a little comic relief when we're dealing with this tough stuff that all of us have been dealing with in recent years? I mean, what's the purpose of the humor?
Well, I think it's twofold, actually. I think for the purpose of this novel in particular, I wanted it to be a place where you had that kind of duality. I think because that's a lot of how I actually live my life. Like I read very heavy articles. Like I very much am aware of like a lot of heavy topical issues, but I'm also a very goofy guy who likes to sit around watching B movies on the weekend. And like, I wanted to kind of balance those two things. So I wanted readers to kind of have that balance as well. But also for me as a writer, this book is very personal. There's a lot of semi-autobiographical content within it. There's a lot of heavy discussions about things that I have not discussed in written form before. And so for me, the levity was just as much of a break in the writing process as it is for readers in the reading of the book. I would spend days and weeks, sometimes months, working on a really heavy scene, a heavy moment, a heavy topic, and it would just drain me. And I was like, I need a laugh. So I'm gonna go back and just make the weirdest, funniest scene that I can. And just so I can laugh as a writer and not be quite burdened by this and have a breath of fresh air for a while.
Yeah, I like that it was really not just for what works in story, but also what was working for you as the author as well. And
I definitely needed it for sure.
Yeah. And so that brings me to this one moment in the book, just thinking about you as an author and connecting with the themes in the book and some of the heavy stuff. So there's a moment where the author in the book is with this guy, Rennie, on book tour, and they just saw this Black Lives Matter protest in honor of a 10-year-old boy who was killed. And then Rennie asked the author what he has to say about it. He's like, you're an author, you're Black. And I'm thinking about the burden of responsibility as a Black author. And I actually typed up a little bit of the scene here. I'm just going to read a short bit here of that. It's not the conversation, but I think it's what the author is thinking in his head. Do I have to write about being Black? What if I were an artist that only drew white characters? What would that say about me? I mean, white writers don't have to write about being white. They can just write whatever books they want. But because I'm Black, I pause to look at my hands and reaffirm that, yes, I really am Black. The story checks out. Does that mean I can only ever write about Blackness? Am I allowed to write about other things? Am I allowed to be something other than simply the color of my skin? And I thought that was really a profound piece there. And I'm wondering what you think about the responsibility, your own responsibility as a Black author, and what you write about, and how you connect with this author in your book.
Yeah, so a lot of that, there's definitely some personal investment in that. Like a lot of my career has been, when The Return came out, like The Return is not there's definitely some small discussions about race within that novel, but it is not a novel that is about race in particular. And yet when it came out, like I was never allowed to just be this author. I was always the Black author, and that kind of followed and moved through there. And that's a lot of what got me thinking and wanting to write about that. Because that's definitely a phenomenon I've seen kind of across the board, where minority voices are always put in the box of having to tell, be these ambassadors for their entire kind of population. And on a part of me, it's a very double-edged sword. Like there are these discussions about Blackness and about minority existences in all forms, where those people in those communities need to have that voice. They need to be seen for that voice. And yet at the same time, we do a bit of a disservice to the imaginations of those people when we limit them to only talking about those topics, or we only view their work through the lens of that topic. I think that crushes a lot of identity in writing and creative arts. That is a bit of a loss on a global scale, I would argue, because you lose the opportunity for these really beautiful voices to speak out on things beyond the box that you want to put them in. And that's a real big travesty. So I wanted to have that discussion a little bit in the book as well.
Yeah, I like that. I feel that dilemma as well, in terms of what am I going to write about.
Yep.
Like you said, it's also on this one hand, I do feel responsible
Yes.
to do it and to do it well.
Yes.
And I do have something to say about race in America, and I want to say something about race in America. But then, like you said, I also don't want to be boxed in either.
Yep.
And I don't want the experience of Blackness to always be just about Black pain and Black struggle.
Right.
I want there to be other understandings of Blackness too.
I think there's almost this sense that if you spend your entire life having to only talk about the race that you are, the gender, or the sexual orientation, the thing that society puts you in the box for, in a sense, society wins, because they've squashed your imagination. They put you in a thing that you can never really escape. And I think that, so it's a real double-edged sword. And yet at the same time, someone else, a friend of mine, kind of described this way. He said, part of existing and having that voice is that responsibility. He said, it's like driving a car at 100 miles per hour. You don't want to take your hands off the wheel, and at the same time, you kind of want to actually do some other things. And yet you're afraid that if you don't say something, if you don't speak to that topic, it's just like taking your hand off the wheel and letting the car crash. You don't want to do that. So what do you do? And the answer to that is something I think everyone has to answer for themselves.
Yeah, I like that analogy that your friend made. Yeah, that's a brilliant one. There's so much in the book, Jason, about what parents teach their children. I think about love and forgiveness and racial identity. And I also noticed this tenderness between fathers and sons that I love that comes through. At the same time, there's this sense of helplessness that is palpable. And it kind of reminded me a little bit of Maurice Carlos Ruffin's We Cast a Shadow, in terms of what fathers will do and the lengths they'll go to protect their Black sons. And so I just wanted to get your take on the meaning of that and the relationship there between the parents and the children. And also, is there a connection to your own family there at all, in terms of what you were told as a child?
Sure. Yeah. There's a lot of the kind of going back to the previous topic almost. There's a lot of discussion in the novel about the role of parents and the responsibility of parents to have the talk with your children. Particularly if you have a Black male son, you have a Black male as a child, even Black females, like a Black child, period. There reaches a point in their lives where you have to have the talk, and the talk is simply about the fact that America will treat you differently, and it's something you have to be able to navigate and understand, both for your own kind of sanity, but also for your safety as well. And as I think parents are always a bit conflicted about that, because that as soon as you tell your child that, there are certain avenues of their imagination that are being closed off. Because that when that realization hits home, like I've seen it within myself, I've seen it within others, like there are things that you stop imagining yourself being able to do because you know that you're in a society that sees you through a certain lens, and that automatically inhibit things. So do you tell your child about that or do you not? And for my own personal life, like I definitely remember when my father had the talk with me, and it was definitely a changing moment. Like it took me a long time. I would argue I'm still kind of resolving a lot of my issues with America, which I've spent my entire lifetime doing, I'm sure, because America has a lot of things to resolve.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a difficult moment. And I watched my sisters raising children, and I got nieces and nephews, so I'm a big part of their lives. And I've had to talk with them, and it was a difficult moment. Like, and I still wonder, like, did I say everything the right way? It's a moment that haunts the parents and it haunts the children, and it's all predicated upon this big social structure that we're all kind of caught up in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's so interesting because the talk, it happens at all ages. After the whole George Floyd, that even this year around the time of the Derek Chauvin verdict, I was riding with my mother in the car, and she's in her 80s, and I was driving, and she started telling me about, oh, be careful, there's a police car.
Yep.
And she was telling me where to keep my hands and how to behave, how to comport myself. And I just thought, wow. And at the moment, we hadn't even been discussing that case. But I thought, oh my goodness, even at this age as an adult, I'm getting the talk from my
for sure. I mean, as a parent, I think you're always terrified for your child's safety, and you always want them to have a safe existence. And yet you're trapped by that sense of powerlessness, and because at a certain level, you can't guarantee their safety. Like, even if you were there with them, you can't guarantee their safety. So you give these talks again and again, just hoping that they will solve the problem and they will save your child. And that's a terrible burden for a parent to bear, I think.
Yeah. I mean, you're dealing with so many really important and difficult issues. How are you able to do it through the characters without being didactic? Because that's something I always think about, that I don't want to do that. And I don't feel you did that because it felt so real with these characters, and particularly with the children in this book. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty difficult, honestly. Like, and kind of how I did, I think part of writing is oftentimes a mystery to the author as well. But I definitely tried to use my own sense of reality in terms of, like, people. We try to avoid these conversations. I think parents try to avoid those talks with their children. We try to avoid, I would say white people try to avoid not all, but like certain white people try to avoid this topic of race. Like, we got the whole, critical race theory thing going on in certain parts of the country right now. There's this sense of avoidance. So I actually I leveraged that in the story, in the telling of the story, I think, to avoid some of that didactic kind of possibility where the characters they're in that same cycle that we as people are always caught in, where, like, they're trying to avoid things so much that they refuse to have the direct conversation. And so the novel oftentimes doesn't have the direct conversation. It has the conversation in pieces. And as you kind of journey through the novel, those pieces begin to stack up in the reader's mind, and the conversation exists. It's just not the big sit down here, let me have this big talk with you. It's like, no, here's a little snippet here, here's a sentence here, here's a fragment here, here's a mood and feeling, and they kind of orchestrate together to have that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's really brilliant. Who did you have in mind when you wrote Hell of a Book? Who's your reader? Is it you? Somebody else?
The readers, everyone. That's the oldest answer. Readers, everyone. But I mean, if I pare it down, I would say, particularly, Black parents, Hispanic parents, minority parents in particular, I think will get a lot out of this. But I also made a lot of room, and I wanted to have a conversation for people who turn on the news in the last few years, or maybe their entire lives, but they see these issues of race in America and all the different back and forths on it, the discussions on it, and they don't know how to enter into that conversation. It's because oftentimes these things feel so foreign and so far away that we want to be a part of the conversation. We want to understand these conversations, but maybe we don't have the people to talk to about them. Maybe we don't have, the opportunities to kind of engage in those. And so we oftentimes just kind of retreat into our shell. So the book is there to bring these conversations in, to bring those readers in who just have thoughts or just questions about the dynamic of minorities and Black people in America, and like what the existence is like for them. So I tried to make space, and that's part of where the comedy comes in. There's a lot of pop culture references in the book, a lot of like old movies and current movies, and like there's just so much comedy beyond just the race components. I think that's where people can come into the book and find their way in, and hopefully that works for them. Yeah,
it certainly worked for me. I felt like it was written just for me, and I think you want every reader to feel when they come away from the book. And so I want to talk a little bit about how you explore in this book, this author on book tour. It was so fun. And I think just for me as an author and a new author, a debut author, it was so much fun to read about this because, my book came out in February. And so I've only had the experience of a virtual book tour. So I've never been on this kind of a book tour, Jason.
Got to get you out there on the road.
I know. I got
to earn your stripes. Got to get you to the road and earn your stripes.
I don't feel legit yet. You know what I mean? So yeah, there's like a certain amount of street cred, I think, to being an author by going on book tour. So tell me a little bit about the author on book tour, and why didn't you give him a name?
Yeah, so the author on tour, and I'll answer the second question first. He doesn't have a name just because it works on a lot of thematic levels, but also when I was writing the book, again, I wanted to make this really not over the top, but this really complex, layered kind of piece of work where readers will be able to dig into it and read it again and dig into it and find something new. And there was a draft of this where I did give him a name, and it sucked a lot of the malleability out of the character, because part of the character, there's a timeless quality to his existence and the things that he's struggling with. And I found that when I gave him a name, it grounded that a little bit too much, because it is a character, and it is also a story about identity. And so the author almost hiding the identity from himself and hiding it from the readers adds another layer to that unseen discussion and those thematic devices of being seen and unseen. So that's part of why that's why he has no name. And like I said, as for me, my book tours are wacky, zany things. And I wanted to capture that with the surrealism and the bizarreness of the things that occur in the book. Because book tours are really wonderful. There are parts of them that are really wonderful. Like when you actually get to bookstores and you have a chance to meet readers and potential readers and bookstore owners, that is when it's all worthwhile. That is the best part of the event. But then, that's like 1 hour out of your 24 hours a day. The other 23 hours, you're just in airports and planes and hotels and
running back to get to the hotel.
You wake up in cities you don't know how you got there. You don't know where you are. When I was on tour for the return, there was a moment when I woke up in this city and literally did not know where I was. And I was almost to the airport. I caught a cab and was just take me to the airport and just had no clue what airport I was going to. It was such a bizarre experience.
Oh my God. Tell me about any other bizarre experiences. I did hear you in another interview. I think this was with your senior editor, telling an experience about being on an airplane on book tour.
Yeah. So that was about 3 or 4 weeks into the book tour for the return. Because that book tour, there was a period when I was on the road for 14 days. I was home for like 17 hours and then on the road again. So I was exhausted. It was 3 or 4 weeks and I was exhausted. I was on this late night flight from California up to Washington State or something. But we take off and I felt fine. I fell asleep as we're taking off. I wake up halfway through the flight and I'm just covered in sweat. My shirt is literally soaked through with sweat. So I was worried. I said, did the air conditioning break? What happened? And of course, everyone else is fine. And I felt a little nauseous. I said, well, let me get up and go to the bathroom so nothing weird happened. So I got up, started walking down the aisle. I got 4 steps down the aisle and just started falling backwards. Because the floor started moving forward. And so there was this guy, it was so funny. He was sitting there with his earbuds in, just relaxing on the flight. He looks up and he sees me starting to fall backwards. And he starts to reach for me and grab me, but his seatbelt catches, so he misses the grab. All of a sudden, everything goes black. I wake up, there's a light shining in my eyes, and they take me to the back of the flight. The flight attendant is really wonderful lady is there, and she says, do you have any health issues? I said, no, I'm fine. I'm healthy. I'm just really tired. She says, why are you so tired? I said, I'm on tour. She goes, oh my God, what's your book about? So you still wind up pitching your book if you pass out on a flight. That's the story of book tour.
That's hilarious that you're still pitching. No matter
You're still
what.
pitching. You wake up pitching no matter where you are.
Right. And like I said earlier, I just love the guy doing the media training
for
the author.
Yes.
And, just kind of talking him through how to handle it, explaining everything. And did you get any coaching like that?
I did. I want to stress to all those people who actually worked on my first book tour experience. I want to stress what happens in Hell of a Book is an exaggerated version of things. But I definitely had a media trainer. I definitely had some weird events when I was on book tour with some weird people. So I had a media trainer and he talked me through how to talk about my book and how to present myself. And the thing was, he gave me some really beneficial information. I actually took a lot from him. But at the same time, it's such a surreal thing to have someone tell you what your own work is about and how you present yourself. It's such a weird phenomenon.
Yeah. Do you find that readers ever tell you because I've found this so far, tell you things about what they see in your book, but there are things that they sound so profound when they tell them to me. I didn't intend them. I'm like, do I go with this or do I, own up to?
Yeah, no, I think that happens because, and that's the nature of art. Like once it's out into the wild, everyone finds their own things in it. And I think that's beautiful. I think that's really wonderful. I love those moments when people find their own things and they're like, oh, I love what your book was saying. That's oftentimes why in interviews, I really avoid questions because I like the idea of readers finding their own truth there and like carrying that forward and letting that be the thing. And I don't want to like deflate that by saying, oh, no, you're wrong. This is actually what that was. So I like for people to have their own truth they take forward with them.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. So I think that's a really good point to hear from the readers and the viewers. So if there are any questions, I don't know, Julie, if you have any to pop up. I do see one here now. I'll just ask from Christina Powers. How has it been for you being a Read with Jenna book club pick?
Oh man, it's been pretty unbelievable actually. So it's amazing how just seeing your name, like, so we knew about this maybe a month or two ago. Like the publisher kind of knew about it for a little while. It was a big secret I had to keep from all my friends, which was so nerve-wracking and bizarre. And so even with all of that, having known about it, and I'm a bit of a stoic kind of person, but man, waking up on Tuesday morning and watching the Today Show and seeing them call my name out and talk about the book, like it gave me chills. It was such an overwhelming kind of moment. Like I'm still on this really big high from it all. So many people now are just seeing the book and finding the novel, which is the thing you always want, so people to find your work and like be a part of it. So it's absolutely wonderful being a book club pick.
Wow. Have you met Jenna Bush Hager yet?
I have not met her at all. I think there's going to be an interview at the end of the month on the show. So hopefully we'll get to meet virtually, I'm sure, through that. And I'm sure she's a really wonderful person.
Yeah. I love watching her and watching her picks. And
yes, she picks she really good. She has such a good selection of books. That's the reason I was really honored. Like I look back at her selection of books and it's like, wow, you okay? Like you're putting me in that same. Okay, awesome.
Yep, you're there.
Really, it's really humbling and surreal. So I'm enjoying it a lot.
Okay, I see that. Okay, I just see Christina popping up, so I'm going to ask. Oh no, here's Anissa. There you go. Actually, Anissa Joy Armstrong is a super reader. Like I know Anissa.
Oh,
she's
cool.
an avid reader, and she's one of the leaders in the Read with Jenna book club group. So she's definitely super fan. So she asked, who was the hardest character to write and why? And then she says, cannot wait to read this book.
Cool, Anissa. I hope you like it. Awesome. So the hardest character to write, they were all difficult in their own way, but by far, I think the hardest one was Soot. Soot's narrative, for those, when you come to the book, I'm trying not to spoil too much. When you come to the book, though, Soot's narrative is a very challenging narrative for him and for readers and for me as the author. And there's also a more than moderate amount of like my personal narratives, like some therapy on the page that I kind of worked out with Soot. And that's always very difficult. The character of Soot exists in this very small town in the South. I live in a very small town in the South. There are things that happen in Soot's story that are almost copied and pasted from things that happened in my small town. Another family that had a certain kind of event occurred that I don't want to tell their story for them. So I just, turn it into fiction. But yeah, Soot was very difficult because Soot required me to look at in many ways, this book as a whole was a letter to my younger self. It's almost it's almost me having the talk with my younger self right now. And Soot was a lot of that vehicle that I kind of worked through to kind of tell myself some things about the world. And so that made it very challenging.
Wow. I love that, but it's kind of a form of therapy.
Yes, all writing is therapy.
Yeah, I feel like it is for me too, Yeah. I'm always dealing with childhood stuff too.
Yes. Yeah. Childhood. We all go back to that and just mine that for ages. That's the right and straight. Just mine your childhood for ages.
Yeah, I could have a real long career, right? Just
exactly.
Mining my childhood. Are there more questions? Let's see. Well, I do see Christina asked, what are you currently reading and what have you recently enjoyed, I should say.
Sure. So the last book that I read that I really enjoyed was Black Buck by Matteo Ascaripour. It's funny because I got to do like a panel with him a few weeks ago, and he's such an awesome guy, like such a cool dude. His book's really wonderful, so I recommend that book to everyone. The book that I'm currently reading that I am also just deeply in love with is a graphic novel actually called Monsters by Barry Windsor Smith. I'm a big comic book fan. I've been a big Barry Windsor Smith fan like literally my entire life. And he wrote this novel, this graphic novel that is really powerful, really impactful. And it has got me blown away both in the terms of the art, but also in his writing. Like, I think he's an amazingly underrated author. So right now I'm halfway through it, and it is just knocking my socks off every night.
Wow. And then I think about the fact that you have a background in poetry, so you probably read a lot of poetry. And of course, I'm wondering, you always think about poetry, how it can shape, the fiction that we write.
Yes.
So tell me about how that has helped shape your writing, your novels.
Yeah, poetry actually helped me tremendously. And so the funny backstory is, like, I began as a fiction writer. Like, as a teenager, I was always a fiction writer. And then around like my, late teens, early 20s, I kind of quote unquote discovered poetry and got into writing poetry. So I did my undergraduate degree in fiction, and I got kind of burnt out and said, well, I want to write poetry for a while. So I went to grad school for that. But what poetry did for my fiction is why I always recommend people to write outside their chosen genre. I used to have really long-winded writing, kind of like I'm a long-winded talker. So I used to have really long-winded writing, but poetry taught me to be much more efficient and economical and still have those leaps and those kind of flourishes that readers need to really kind of move through the novel. So that helped me really pare down my novel writing in all kind of dramatic ways. So poetry helped me a lot. Okay,
perfect. Ron Block. Ron Block is wonderful, from the Cuyahoga County Public Library.
Terrific.
Huge library influencer.
Hey, Ron.
yeah. Ron's such a good guy. What writers have influenced you? Ron asked.
Sure. The two biggest writers who influenced me are John Gardner and William Golding. William Golding, obviously, Lord of the Flies and The Inheritors. Like, those two books, just for decades, those books have just guided my writing. And John Gardner's novel Grendel was the book that made me want to become a writer. Like, I read that at a pretty young age, and it had such a powerful impact on me that, like, I said I want to be a writer. I want to do it, and that was the reason I started writing. So, John Gardner and William Golding.
Wow, those influences can be just so powerful.
Yes, yeah, very much so, very much so.
Yeah. So people, please enter questions, comments, for a chance to win a copy of Hell of a Book. It is a hell of a book. So please do enter. Let's see. Anissa says, Anissa. Oh, did she win a copy?
Yeah, like she won. Awesome.
Oh my God. Yay, Anissa.
Congratulations.
Hell of a winner.
See what you did there. Good job.
I know, right? I know. Like, that just popped up. I'm like, wow. So Anissa knows what to do to contact to get a copy. I do have another question for you, just for myself personally. Sure. We talked about it a little bit before we came on, that I'm working on book 2. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just curious, from your perspective now, having done this multiple times, just how do you approach a second book in a way when you've got the pressure of trying to live up to expectations of book number 1, and when you didn't have anybody waiting for book number 1, and now you got this deadline, for book 2. So just tell me, what's the secret to that?
There's no secret. Like, the truth is probably the hardest book you're going to write, for all the reasons you just listed. Like, it is the book that suddenly people know who you are. You're not in your private little shell anymore. You're in this very visible space, and people are waiting for it. You got editors waiting on timelines. You got all these people, like readers, who know your work, who want more from you, and they want it quickly. It can be really difficult, because that's when you oftentimes lose some of your identity and your footing as a writer. Because before, there was no one in your ear saying, I want, your book should be like this, and I would love it if you did this. And now there's so many people and so many reactions around you that you're trying to, like, navigate. And so if I have any advice to that, I would say, don't pressure yourself any more than possible. And just take some time, soul search, and figure out what you want the story to be. Not what your readers want, not what your editor wants, not what your agent, no one else. Like, find out what you want the book to be and follow that path. Like, that's the best advice that I think I can give.
That's wonderful advice. Just kind of listen to my own truth and write for me, and tell the story that I want to tell. That's beautiful. I mean, you certainly did that in Hell of a Book, and it's a book that connected with me so deeply and so viscerally. So I just want to thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Thank you to everybody for joining the Zeitgeist. This is wonderful. Jane will be back next time to host. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. Go out, get Hell of a Book, because it truly is a hell of a book. So
thanks.
bye, everybody.